Okay, I told you when Donald Trump declared this bogus national emergency over the non-existent crisis at the US-Mexico border that there would be legal challenges. And indeed, there are. 16 states have now filed a lawsuit over Donald Trump's declaration of a national emergency to try to commandeer money from the military and the Department of Defense to build a border wall. 16 states, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota. Yes, Minnesota. Almost said Minneapolis. Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, and Virginia, all participating in this lawsuit, which claims primarily that this declaration of a national emergency is a misuse of presidential power. And there's a couple of different ways that this can be argued. And we'll see as this progresses which is the path that actually is employed here. Number one is the argument that historically, and I told you this yesterday in part, historically, national emergencies have been used to expedite either funding or action on issues that have bipartisan support. So sanctions on particular people around the world, delivering aid somewhere, declaring a particular situation a disaster zone or a humanitarian crisis or whatever. The idea is there is bipartisan support, and the declaration of the national emergency helps to further the position of the House and Senate in order to more quickly achieve something. Donald Trump's doing the opposite here. There's no congressional consensus for funding his border wall. Donald Trump has chosen to use the declaration of a national emergency not to more quickly do what Congress is trying to do, but to actually do the opposite of what Congress has shown a willingness to do, to circumvent the hesitation of Congress, the House and the Senate, to fund Donald Trump's bogus border wall. So, as I said, if you're a small government conservative, you should be furious at what Donald Trump is doing. If you believe in checks and balances, you should be furious about this decision. If you are against expanding executive branch power and the power of the office of the presidency, which many small government conservatives claim to be against, then you have to be against this. If you don't even care about any of that stuff and you just believe in facts and logic, you have to realize that there is no factual case to be made that there is a crisis on the southern border. The facts just don't bear it out. And I won't even repeat the full list again because it's total broken record circumstances at this point on that issue. Now, there may also be lawsuits coming from red states, the actual border states where the wall would go, because there are right wingers who may, generally speaking, believe that there's an immigration crisis or like the idea of a border wall. But there are right wingers who own land on the border who don't want the government taking their land for the wall, particularly on the basis of a national emergency declared by the president going around the will of Congress. What is really important here is that the lawsuits aren't about the wall per se. They are lawsuits about executive branch overreach on the basis of a declaration by the president seizing money and seizing potentially property, land. And the argument, Pat, is that this makes it a constitutional issue. And the best case scenario is that this takes years to resolve, nothing gets built, and eventually a Democratic president says, there's no more emergency and we're not trying to build the wall. I see that as the sort of best path forward to tie this thing up indefinitely.
That does sound like the right path forward, and everyone knew that these lawsuits were going to happen, including the president himself. He mentioned that during his national emergency speech. And honestly, if the courts do strike this down in time, I don't think he'll care that much. I think he just wanted to deliver this campaign promise to his supporters. And he's going to come to the polls in 2020 and say that I did what I could. I tried to build the wall through Congress. I tried to do it through a national emergency declaration, and the court struck me down and everyone's against me. But his supporters will still view this as an attempt at winning, like he tried to fulfill his campaign promise.
Isn't it sort of weird that they claim to be against socialism, but a lot of them are okay with the government seizing both taxpayer land and taxpayer money by circumventing Congress to build a wall? aren't those the bad elements of socialism that they claim to be against? It's a very, very strange thing. We'll see what happens now. This could be, we've been reporting on it daily since the declaration of the national emergency, but we may get to a point where there's very little to say about it because it's just going to be tied up in courts for years, which I think would actually be a pretty good outcome.